The man's legs burned as he pumped the pedals faster. The generator whined, barely keeping his radio transmitter alive. Through the static, he could hear the operator asking him to repeat his message. Through his window, on a tiny remote island in the middle of nowhere, the morning sky appeared wrong. What he saw shouldn't exist. Airplanes. Not here. Not in these numbers. No one was ready. Another Pearl Harbor was about to happen, in the last place anyone was expecting. A strategic transformation. In early 1942, Darwin remained a frontier outpost at Australia's northern edge, just 5,800 souls clinging to civilization's edge, sweltering under a relentless tropical sun. Yet beneath this sleepy exterior, the remote town was transforming into something far more vital, a strategic linchpin in the desperate Allied struggle against Imperial Japan's Pacific campaign. Throughout the 1930s, Australian military planners had steadily developed naval and air bases in Darwin, their eyes fixed nervously on Japan's expanding empire. As war clouds darkened across the Pacific, this once-forgotten settlement underwent a fevered military metamorphosis. By August 1941, Darwin had become a crucial link in the South Pacific air ferry route, offering Allied aircraft safe passage to the Philippines while skirting Japanese-controlled territories. Engineers worked around the clock, widening airstrips, stockpiling precious fuel reserves, and dredging shipping channels. The town's modest port facilities strained under the sudden influx as Allied cargo, troops, and aircraft poured through, bound for defensive positions across the Netherlands, East Indies, and beyond. When Japan unleashed its offensive across Southeast Asia in December 1941, Darwin's strategic value multiplied overnight. By mid-February 1942, it had evolved into the primary Allied forward base supporting the crumbling defense of the Dutch East Indies. Japanese forces had already captured Ambon, Borneo, and Celebes. Landings on Timor were imminent. Java would follow soon after. To Japanese commanders, the conclusion was inescapable. Darwin had to be neutralized. On February 10th, the Japanese reconnaissance aircraft glided high above Darwin's harbor, meticulously cataloging the scene below. Through powerful binoculars, they counted over 20 merchant vessels, several warships, and more than 30 aircraft scattered across 2 airfields. Some vessels had just returned from an aborted mission to reinforce Timor, their holds still loaded with troops and supplies. Darwin lay exposed. The strike would come soon. Australian veteran and decorated officer Rex Lippman later spoke of the dangerous unpreparedness in Darwin before and after the air raids. Quote, "No one was ready for anything." Strike Force Assembly. The sun cast sharp morning light across the steel decks of 4 Japanese aircraft carriers as they sliced through the Timor Sea on February 19, 1942. Deck crews swarmed across Akagi's flight deck with practiced precision, preparing aircraft for the imminent strike. Engines had been running since dawn, as mechanics made final adjustments to bomb racks and fuel tanks. Every component was meticulously checked and rechecked, the aircraft arrayed in perfect formation. Akagi, originally laid down as a battlecruiser before conversion to an aircraft carrier, now served as flagship for the Imperial Japanese Navy's formidable First Air Fleet. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo stood stoically on her bridge, his weathered face revealing nothing as he watched the preparations below. Behind Akagi sailed her sister ship, Kaga, while the carriers Soryu and Hiryu maintained perfect formation. These same 4 flat tops had devastated Pearl Harbor just 10 weeks earlier. Now, positioned 220 miles northwest of their new target, they prepared to strike again. An imposing wall of naval firepower escorted the carriers. 4 heavy cruisers bristling with 10 8-inch guns each, screened by 9 destroyers. Every vessel in this tightly coordinated formation had a specific role in what had become a well-rehearsed operation. Supplies had been flowing northward from Darwin to bolster resistance in the Dutch East Indies, Singapore, and the Philippines. ABDA, the American, British, Dutch, Australian forces, had consolidated their position, and the Japanese command was determined to shatter this defensive alignment. One commander of the Imperial Japanese Navy, who had helped plan the Pearl Harbor attack, stated bluntly, quote, "Darwin poses a threat to current and planned operations in the Netherlands East Indies and recommend it should be the first target." The Japanese admirals concurred, issuing precise orders on February 9th that proposed, quote, "to annihilate the enemy strength in the Port Darwin area." and to intercept and destroy enemy naval and transport fleets. Final preparations. On the morning of February 19, 1942, Japanese pilots gathered in briefing rooms aboard their carriers, faces grim as they absorbed their final instructions. At 7:30 a.m., Commander Mitsuo Fuchida, the same officer who had led the Pearl Harbor attack, gave the signal to launch. Engines thundered across the carrier decks as flight operations commenced with mechanical precision. 18 Mitsubishi A6M20 fighters were first to take off, their engines screaming as they accelerated down the deck and climbed into the cloudless sky. These lethal fighters, feared throughout the Pacific for their exceptional maneuverability, were followed by 18 Aichi D3A1 Val dive bombers and 27 Nakajima B5N2 Cape bombers. By 8:45 a.m., the complete strike force, 188 aircraft, was aloft, engines drumming in unison as they formed up. Fuchida led from his Cape bomber, organizing the formation and setting course southeast toward Darwin. Zeros ascended to a higher altitude. Behind them, bombers advanced in disciplined waves, their shadows sliding across the waves below. Meanwhile, the Japanese fleet reduced speed and reversed course, steaming away from Darwin to await the aircrew's return. The strike force was configured with tactical precision. Cape bombers carried 250 kilogram and 60 kilogram general-purpose bombs for high-altitude level bombing. The Val dive bombers were armed for precision strikes, designed to plunge steeply toward specific targets before releasing their payloads at close range. Zeros maintained their position above the formation, tasked with clearing the skies of any Allied fighters. Darwin, despite its growing strategic importance, remained critically vulnerable. Its anti-air defenses were inadequate and outdated. The city possessed only 16 heavy 94mm caliber guns capable of engaging high-altitude bombers, plus 2 more of slightly smaller caliber. These weapons had slow firing rates, lacked radar direction, and required manual aiming, rendering them largely ineffective against fast-moving aircraft. For low-altitude defense, gunners relied on a handful of aging World War I-era light machine guns with limited range and stopping power. The air garrison was outmatched. RAAF squadrons flew slow Wirraway trainers and light bombers, no match for Japanese Zeros. 6 Hudsons had just retreated from Timor, few, if any, serviceable. Even if these RAAF crews showed courage, they lacked numbers, equipment, and coordination, leaving them unable to defend against the overwhelming Japanese air assault. The only significant air assets defending Darwin that morning were 10 Curtiss P-40 Warhawk fighters of Major Floyd Pell's 33rd Pursuit Squadron. These single-engine, all-metal fighter bombers were tough, fast in a dive, and armed with 650 caliber machine guns. Though they had proven themselves in combat against Japanese aircraft in other theaters, they remained outclassed in agility and climb rate by the A6M0. The squadron, including Lieutenant Robert G. Ostreicher, had taken off the previous day, bound for Java, part of a larger Allied effort to reinforce the Dutch East Indies, but worsening weather forced a return to Darwin. This unplanned reversal, not coordinated with base command, would soon create devastating confusion. Missed warnings. Around 9 a.m., the U.S. Navy PBY Catalina from Patrol Wing 22 droned steadily over the waters near Bathurst Island, its crew scanning the sea and sky. The morning had been uneventful, hot, hazy, the sea calm, but now tension hung over every patrol. Then one of the crew spotted them, dark specks approaching fast from the northeast, descending from altitude. Within moments, it was clear they weren't allied. A swarm of Zeros, up to 9 strong, closed in rapidly. The crew scrambled to respond, but the flying boat had no chance against the incoming fighters. The Zeros dove from above and behind, their guns tearing through the Catalina's wings and fuselage with merciless accuracy. Among the attackers was a veteran of Pearl Harbor, Petty Officer First Class Nakahama, whose aim was precise and unrelenting. The American crew fought desperately to maintain control, but were ultimately forced to ditch in the sea. Remarkably, the crew survived, but the damage was catastrophic. The radio was destroyed. The silence that followed proved disastrous. With no distress signal from the Catalina reaching Allied forces, a critical opportunity for early warning was lost. At 9:15 a.m., radar operator John Gribble, stationed with RAF Fighter Command, detected the approaching aircraft formation on his screen. The pattern appeared suspicious, and was rapidly closing in on Darwin. Gribble immediately transmitted a warning, attempting to alert higher command to the imminent threat. Despite his urgency, the warning went unheeded. Just 20 minutes later, Father McGrath, manning a Coast Watcher position at the Sacred Heart Mission on Bathurst Island, sent an urgent message via pedal radio to Darwin's Amalgamated Wireless Postal Station, quote, "An unusually large air formation bearing down on us from the northwest." This message reached RAAF operations, but officers misinterpreted the situation, incorrectly identifying the approaching planes as Major Pell's returning Warhawk fighters. This critical error meant no general alarm was sounded. Darwin's air raid sirens remained silent as the Japanese strike force grew ever closer. Meanwhile, Squadron Leader Pell ordered 5 aircraft under Lieutenant Robert G. Ostreicher to maintain an altitude of 15,000 feet as a combat air patrol over Darwin, designating them Flight B. Pell landed with the remaining 5 Warhawks of A Flight at Darwin's RAAF airfield for refueling. It was approximately 9:55 a.m. In the confusion of the Catalina attack, Nakahama became separated from his flight and continued toward Darwin from the north, unknowingly becoming the advance scout. Meanwhile, the main Japanese formation curved inland from the southwest, preparing for a coordinated assault on the harbor. Harbor under fire. At 9:58 a.m., the first wave of Japanese aircraft descended on Darwin. With no effective radar warning, the city lay defenseless. Zeros led the assault, swooping low over the harbor with machine guns blazing, tracer fires stitching the water and sending dock workers diving for cover. Merchant Navy Captain Thomas Minto later recalled, quote, "At 10:05 hours on the morning of Thursday, February 19th, out of a lovely sky with a few clouds, we got our first taste of enemy action in Australian waters. No matter what's been written elsewhere, the first warning the shipping received was when the first bomb hit near the wharf. Then the sirens went ashore. HMAS Gunbar found herself among the first targets, strafed violently as her crew scrambled for whatever cover they could find. Within seconds, the tranquil harbor transformed into a maelstrom of destruction, with explosions erupting across the water. Mervyn Lloyd A. described the chaotic scene unfolding before him, quote, "We'd been told there would be warnings, but it didn't happen. There wasn't any warning. We were absolutely shocked by the force of that bombing. The first we saw was a whole heap of bombers coming over, and it wasn't long before dive bombers and fighters, and there was planes going everywhere and explosions everywhere." The American destroyer tender William B. Preston and Australian sloop Swan attempted to get underway, black smoke pouring from their stacks as they built steam. But it was too late. Both suffered direct hits. 7 crewmen lost their lives instantly, with 22 more wounded. Then came Peary. The 1,190-ton U.S. Navy destroyer maneuvered desperately to escape the harbor, her anti-aircraft guns blazing defiantly at the attackers. 5 bombs found their mark in rapid succession. The engine room disintegrated in the blast. A forward magazine erupted in a massive fireball that lit up the harbor. Her captain and every officer aboard perished. 80 men were lost, with only 40 surviving, most suffering severe injuries. Ships ablaze. Near the wharf, MV Neptuna was still offloading cargo when a direct hit struck. Seconds later, her munitions detonated. The explosion launched a towering column of flame hundreds of feet skyward, the shockwave reverberating across the harbor. Shrapnel scythed through everything nearby. Brian Winspear, who served as a wireless air gunner in the Royal Australian Air Force, recalled with vivid detail, quote, "We were in a trench about 50 yards from the hangars, and you could see the Japanese in their cockpits, see their faces smiling and laughing. I looked up as the sun glinted on the bombs as they were falling, and it was just like confetti." Australian anti-aircraft batteries opened fire from positions across the city, Darwin Oval, Fanny Bay, and hastily prepared emplacements near the port. The 2nd and 14th Heavy AA batteries fired their 3.7-inch guns, while the 19th Light Horse Machine Gun Regiment raked the sky from their positions atop oil tanks. Their efforts proved futile against the onslaught. The guns were too slow and inaccurate. Only a single Val dive bomber was confirmed shot down, spiraling into the harbor with a trail of black smoke. By 10:10 a.m., 3 warships and 6 merchant vessels lay at the harbor bottom. 10 more ships burned or drifted helplessly. As the Japanese strike force withdrew, they spotted 2 Philippine freighters offshore, Florence D. and Don Isidro. They marked these vessels for later attention. As smoke billowed from the harbor and ships burned below, B-Flight climbed into the sky over Darwin. The desperate air battle. Zeros pounced from 2,000 feet above, diving with lethal precision. Their cannons ripped through the air. The first Warhawk fell mid-climb, spinning uncontrollably before vanishing beneath the clouds. Another pilot plummeted straight into the bay, a trail of smoke marking his final descent. Nagahama shot down 4 Warhawks, narrowly missing Ostreicher. He then strafed 2 flying boats moored in the port, adding to the destruction below. Lieutenant Ostreicher pulled hard toward the sun, trying to gain altitude and momentary respite. But a Zero found him, its cannons ripping into his fuselage. Ostreicher returned fire desperately, his 50 caliber machine guns hammering in response. At 12,000 feet, he glanced upward. 18 Zeros circled at 20,000 feet, waiting their turn. One by one, they dove in single file, shredding the slower Warhawks below. One pilot limped back toward the airfield, his shoulder wounded. Another Warhawk was riddled with holes before spiraling out of control. The pilot bailed out over open water, 10 miles from shore, his parachute a tiny white speck against the vast ocean. Brian Winspear later grimly recalled the air battle, quote, "They weren't very good pilots. They'd just learned to fly, and of course the Zeros just butchered them all. Most of the pilots bailed out with parachutes, but the Japanese would have pot shots at them when they were floating down." When the skirmish ended, Ostreicher was the only American pilot still airborne. Dodging cannon bursts and diving shadows, he downed 2 Japanese dive bombers, scoring the first Allied air victories over Australian soil. He touched down at 11:45 a.m., his aircraft damaged but intact. But as ground crews serviced his Warhawk, another wave arrived, destroying it before it could take off again. Meanwhile, A-Flight never left the runway. Zeros screamed over the RAAF base at treetop level, strafing and bombing with devastating accuracy. At least 20 aircraft sat exposed on the field. Some attempted to launch. Few succeeded. Major Pell took off under intense fire. His aircraft was hit repeatedly as his wheels left the ground. The Warhawk staggered to about 80 feet before slamming back onto the runway in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. By noon, most of Darwin's fighter defense had been eliminated, burning on the ground or shot from the sky. Zeros continued their attack, circling with impunity. What began as a surprise harbor bombing had evolved into an aerial massacre. But one Zero did not make it back. Petty Officer Hajime Toyoshima's Zero was limping home when tracers ripped through the fuselage. One round punctured the fuel tank. With fuel leaking fast, he pushed on, but the engine gave out over Melville Island. He brought the fighter down hard in the bush, skidding to a halt. 2 days later, Toyoshima was found and taken prisoner at gunpoint. He became the first Japanese combatant captured on Australian soil. The Allies would study his wrecked Zero for weeks. The second wave. Around noon, a formation of 54 Japanese bombers appeared over Darwin. 27 Mitsubishi G4M1 Betty bombers from Kendari and 27 G3M1 Nell bombers from Ambon. Flying at 18,000 feet, these twin-engine aircraft split into 2 coordinated waves, approaching from different directions to converge over the military airfield. The bombers ignored the smoldering town and devastated port. Their target was the airfield, where most aircraft had already been destroyed or disabled. As the twin formations aligned over their target, bomb bay doors opened simultaneously. The first detonation struck barracks and hangars. A direct hit obliterated the main hangar, scattering debris across the flight line. The hospital collapsed amid sequential blasts, burying medical personnel and patients alike. Storage buildings ignited as fuel drums and ammunition stocks exploded in chain reactions, sending fireballs hundreds of feet into the air. Within minutes, 6 Lockheed Hudsons, vital for reconnaissance and patrol, were torn apart. Another was left mangled in a blaze. 2 remaining P-40s undergoing repairs were completely destroyed. A lone B-24 Liberator, newly arrived and not yet operational, became engulfed in flames. Bob Andrew was only 21 when he arrived in Darwin. He later reflected, quote, "You just lay low and hope there wasn't a bomb with your name on it. Like most things in war, it was the luck of the draw. Your tin hat seemed quite inadequate, but you took what came." The airfield was transformed into a wasteland of twisted metal and cratered concrete. The assault claimed 6 airmen and rendered the base completely inoperative. After completing a second pass, the formation banked eastward and disappeared by 12:20 p.m. Later that afternoon, Japanese dive bombers conducted follow-up strikes on targets of opportunity. They located the Philippine freighters Don Isidro and Florence D offshore. Both vessels were attacked, with Don Isidro struck by 5 bombs that ignited destructive fires. Her crew intentionally beached her to prevent sinking, though 11 crewmen were lost. Florence D suffered direct hits to her ammunition cargo, triggering massive explosions that sent her to the bottom within minutes, taking 4 crewmen with her. Survivors from both vessels were rescued over subsequent days, many found clinging to floating wreckage or washed ashore on nearby islands. The numbers. The raid on Darwin plunged the city into chaos. Essential services collapsed, water and electrical systems were knocked out, and critical infrastructure rendered useless. Reports of looting circulated widely, with even military police accused of participating. According to journalist Douglas Lockwood, quote, highly exaggerated rumors of an impending Japanese invasion had already reached the base from the town and spread quickly among those wanting to believe them. In the absence of restraint, men gathered their belongings and abandoned their stations. While Nagumo's bombers failed to destroy fuel depots, repair facilities, and storage installations in Pearl Harbor, Darwin's strategic infrastructure was methodically devastated. The raid involved 206 bombers, dropping 681 bombs, with a combined weight of 251,500 pounds, exceeding the tonnage dropped on Pearl Harbor. The destruction effectively eliminated Darwin as an Allied supply and transport base for delivering aid to the Dutch East Indies. Regarding casualties, Captain Minto recalled, quote, at 0:30 a.m. on Friday the 20th, I interviewed Colonel Donaldson and asked him how many bodies he had for burial. He told me 15, and he expected a few more by daylight. The final human toll would prove far greater, though controversy still surrounds the exact numbers. Harry McCready, who helped rescue survivors and recover bodies in the harbor, insisted, quote, we definitely estimate over 1,000. However, some historians concluded, quote, numbers such as 1,100 are fancifully high. Ultimately, the records state that roughly 250 personnel lost their lives, including about 80 aboard USS Peary and 45 on MV Neptuna, including Captain William Mitchie. Another 400 suffered wounds, with about 68 casualties being civilians. Japanese aircraft losses range from 2 to 7 planes, with total crew losses of 7 airmen. Fearing public panic, the Australian government chose not to release complete casualty figures, inadvertently creating myths of a deliberate cover-up. However, contemporary newspapers contradict this notion. The Prime Minister was quoted on front pages saying, quote, the government regards the attacks as most grave and makes it quite clear that a severe blow has been struck on Australian soil. After the war, Commander Fuchida expressed reservations about the operation, stating, quote, it seemed hardly worthy of us. If ever a sledgehammer was used to crack an egg, it was then. Rebuilding and legacy. The port of Darwin would eventually be rebuilt as a major supply depot surrounded by numerous airfields. Darwin would endure 62 additional Japanese air raids between March 1942 and November 1943, with the most devastating occurring on June 16, 1942, when fuel tanks were set ablaze and key infrastructure suffered further damage. Improved radar installations and strengthened defenses ensured that another Australian Pearl Harbor would not occur. The lessons learned from the first raid were applied with increasing effectiveness, allowing Australian and American forces to mount progressively stronger resistance against subsequent attacks. The Darwin raid, occurring just 74 days after Pearl Harbor, represented the first enemy attack on Australian soil in the Commonwealth's history. It delivered a profound psychological blow, bringing the Pacific War directly to Australia's doorstep. Though strategically successful for Japan, this victory contributed to what historians later termed victory disease, a dangerous overconfidence that would eventually contribute to their defeat at the Battle of Midway just 4 months later.